Shadows of the Future by Storm Queen 873. Chapter 24. Anakin's scream rang through the Force. A force wave unlike any other slammed through the room and tearing at everything. Qui-Gon was knocked flat on his back, gasping as the air was snatched from his lungs and spots danced across his vision. The wind around him howled, the scraps of metal scratching at him as they flew past. It stopped. Qui-Gon coughed, breathing several deep breaths before rolling onto his hands and knees, and he shook his head as he attempted to clear it. He blinked rapidly, forcing his eyes to focus, and when he could see two hands clenched against the durasteel floor, and not four, he looked around. Shock made him blink. Everyone in the room was struggling to their feet, looking rather dazed and unsteady. The wall with a window had been completely blown out. Durasteel beams that once supported the Duracrete walls were twisted into unnatural angles and dust floated through the air. The platform had presumably gone along with the wall, taking most of the crates, but thankfully no Jedi had met the same fate. "Obi-Wan, where is he?" Qui-Gon spun as best he could, considering that the dizziness decided to linger, his gaze hunting for his apprentice. Relief filled him. Obi-Wan sat exactly where he'd fallen, though he was fully alert. His blue-green eyes were wide as they surveyed his surroundings, and to Qui-Gon he appeared completely unscathed by the powerful onslaught. He clutched an unconscious Anakin, and Qui-Gon moved to take a few steps towards them. Before he could get very far, Obi-Wan rose smoothly, his gaze narrowing as the Force swirled around him. Qui-Gon watched as he shifted Anakin, freeing up one hand and calling his lightsaber to him. "Obi-Wan, what?" Qui-Gon called, but received no response. Obi-Wan darted forward, intent upon a momentarily forgotten figure. "Palpatine!" Qui-Gon thought with a small burst of shock, blinking as the Sith pushed himself up, his robes badly torn and blood trickling down one of his bare arms. He brought up his lightsaber, trying to stave off Obi-Wan. Palpatine was just a split second too slow. Obi-Wan flicked his weapon just so, destroying the block Palpatine brought up hastily and disarmed the Sith. The red lightsaber went flying from his grasp, and a brief burst from the Force sent it spinning towards Qui-Gon, who caught it neatly. He watched then as Obi-Wan brought his own down on Palpatine's neck, halting his attack just before it severed the Senator's head from his body. "I don't believe it." Qui-Gon's jaw dropped, and he could sense the shock that permeated the room as everyone stared at Obi-Wan. The young man's gaze was locked on the Sith before him, whose yellow eyes stared up at his attacker. "Who are you?" Palpatine hissed, the dark side rising up around him. "Obi-Wan Kenobi," the Jedi replied. A small smile then appeared on his lips, and his eyes shone in silent laughter. "Though certainly not as you were expecting." Palpatine growled softly, glowering at Obi-Wan, who adjusted his grip on Anakin. Master Windu, his apprentice is right behind you, wearing a set of binders I believe are better suited for the Senator, if you would be so kind as to remove them," Obi-Wan said then, though without turning to look, and Qui-Gon glanced toward the group of masters. Mace started a little, but turned. Sure enough, there was the Zabrak sitting against a Durasteel pillar that had somehow survived the blast. His hands were locked behind him as they wrapped around the beams. Several masters moved beside him in order to ensure that the Sith remained still as Mesa popped off the binders and moved to Obi-Wan's side. "Would you like me to place them on him?" Mace asked, and Obi-Wan nodded before focusing intently upon Palpatine. "Struggle just a little, and I cut your head off," he whispered, though everyone heard. And Qui-Gon stepped up to join Obi-Wan. He sent brief pulse through the bond, which was carefully returned, though it wasn't any less happy or affectionate. "You do, and the Senate will charge you with murder," Palpatine replied, the dark side swelling around him, and Obi-Wan moved the blade a hair closer. "Then I'll be charged with murder, but you will be dead," he replied, and though fury raged through Palpatine, his power dwindled to a hateful simmer. "Better at least to have the slim chance of escape, right?" "You are no ordinary Padawan," Palpatine snarled as Mace locked his arms behind his back, the binders snapping in place loudly.
You're just as dangerous as I am, forcing yourself to a level of skill rarely seen by a master, and I'm sure you did it without the—
Obi-Wan is nowhere near as dangerous as you, Qui-Gon interrupted. He is as firmly ingrained in the light as you are in the dark.
Palpatine glowered at him, and he sensed Obi-Wan's grateful smile as it rolled through the bond. Why wilt I give now, Padawan Kenobi? Ki-Adi-Mundi said as he came up beside him. The azure blade of his lightsaber guarded Palpatine as Obi-Wan stepped away and was joined by Mace's amethyst blade. Masters, if you will permit me, Obi-Wan began deactivating his lightsaber and breathing out a heavy breath. I believe Palpatine and his apprentice have a set of personal quarters beyond here.
Restrings are in the muter?
Yoda's voice rang out, and Qui-Gon nearly jumped when he realized the old master had hobbled his way over to them.
Seems that you look for something I do.
Yes, Master Yoda, Obi-Wan said, bowing respectfully as best he could with Anakin in his arms. I believe he may have more of those binders, which are impossible to break open using the Force alone, as well as some Force inhibitors that would undoubtedly come in handy right now. Yoda murmured and motioned to Qui-Gon, who blinked a little.
Take Qui-Gon you will, and meanwhile guard these two we shall.
Thank you, Master, Obi-Wan said, dipping again in a bow, and Qui-Gon raised his eyebrows when Obi-Wan looked at him.
Are you alright?
Qui-Gon asked gently, as Obi-Wan's shoulders slumped briefly.
And what about Anakin? Why is he unconscious?
That Force wave came from him, Obi-Wan said, glancing down at the boy he held, and Qui-Gon felt his eyebrows rise. I should have known he wouldn't have stayed away, especially if he was worried. Obi-Wan looked up then, his eyes awash with mingling fear and horror, but his voice was steady, if a little hoarse. How did he get here anyway? He didn't really jump down from the door, did he? Both Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon turned then, glancing up at the exit. Framed in the darkness stood Queen Amidala, her expression rather stricken beneath the layers of white face paint, and Qui-Gon knew she was studying Palpatine. He saw her two Jedi Guardians standing beside her, looking as annoyed as Jedi Masters could, but their expressions steadily melted to alarm as they studied the room before them. I should have expected her to be here, came Obi-Wan's rather wry thoughts. I doubt you'll ever meet a more stubborn female. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks she's invincible.
She is young, after all,
Qui-Gon returned, following as Obi-Wan began to walk towards her, watching as the young queen's gaze drifted to the two of them. Her brown eyes widened faintly when they landed on Anakin, and she looked to Master Itherba sharply. Qui-Gon could see the Master sigh a little, but he placed an arm around her, and the two leapt down to the ground level. What happened? She asked, her voice rising an octave in concern despite her appearance. Is he all right? He's fine, Obi-Wan assured her. Would you mind taking him for a moment? I still have some things to handle. Queen Amidala nodded carefully, her headdress making it difficult for her to properly execute the motion. I'll take him back to the hangar. We'll wait for you there. Obi-Wan smiled faintly and attempted to hand the boy to her outstretched arms, but Anakin clutched Obi-Wan's sleep tunic tightly, much as he had done the previous day. Qui-Gon barely suppressed a smile and reached over to help, carefully prying open Anakin's clenched fists. He felt Obi-Wan's stab of guilt when the boy whimpered at the loss. Queen Amidala held the boy carefully, who curled up against her, but he only quieted when Obi-Wan smoothed back his hair. Qui-Gon felt their bond pulsing gently, as Obi-Wan strove to reassure Anakin that he wouldn't be gone long, and Qui-Gon's suppressed smile found its way to the surface. Thank you, Your Highness, Obi-Wan said softly, stepping away, and Queen Amidala favored him with a small smile. We will see you shortly, she said, her voice back to its grave tones, and Master Itherba leapt back up to the door. Qui-Gon watched as Obi-Wan followed their departure with his gaze, his eyes darkening until Qui-Gon laid a hand on his shoulder.
Shall we go, Padawan?
He asked quietly. Obi-Wan smiled, though his expression remained rather melancholy, and he turned, heading swiftly for a door to their right. Qui-Gon had to walk surprisingly quickly to catch up, and once he was able to fall in step with his apprentice, part of him wondered what had caused the sudden mood shift.
Are you feeling alright?
He said, and Obi-Wan shrugged a little. I just wish Anakin hadn't done that, he said, his brows knitting faintly. I know his intentions were for the best, but he could have been killed. Qui-Gon had an extremely difficult time hiding the smile that threatened to sprint across his face, but his efforts were all for naught. Obi-Wan threw him an exasperated look, easily sensing his master's amusement. And don't you dare try telling me you weren't afraid, Obi-Wan snapped. I could sense how terrified you were. Qui-Gon sighed a little, though his mirth didn't fade.
Obi-Wan, you have scared me within a centimeter of my life numerous times. You've thrown yourself into danger in panicked attempts to protect me far more than I would like, very similar to the way Anakin just did.
Obi-Wan seemed to wilt a little, but Qui-Gon wasn't finished.
It's only natural, my reckless Padawan, that I find it rather entertaining when you discover yourself in my shoes.
He continued, his lips twisting in a rather wry smile.
I do appreciate irony, after all.
And here I thought you would classify it as my comeuppance. Obi-Wan shot back, and Qui-Gon grinned.
That too.
Qui-Gon said, watching as Obi-Wan rolled his eyes, but the mood finally seemed to lift. Obi-Wan sent him another smile, his eyes finally brightening with an emotion Qui-Gon could only describe as triumph.
I hope it doesn't take me too long to adjust to all these changes in you, Padawan.
Qui-Gon said then, sighing dramatically.
You nearly died yesterday, and then today you're beating with Siths. I can hardly believe it.
Neither can I, Obi-Wan replied. I'm sure the council members are thoroughly shocked as well. Wouldn't you agree? Qui-Gon chuckled a little.
The council is going to be at a complete loss over this,
he said, earning an incredulous look from Obi-Wan, and he rolled his eyes a little.
Yes, I'm pleased by that. They need to be shaken up every once in a while. It keeps them from going complacent.
I'm afraid I'm inclined to agree with you, having sat among them, Obi-Wan said. I only hope they don't decide to kick me out of the order, though I can't say I'll be heartbroken if they do. Qui-Gon looked up in alarm.
What makes you say that? If you show them what you showed me, and with Master Yoda testifying for you, they can't possibly kick you out. I'd leave as well if they did so.
Obi-Wan flashed him a grateful smile, though his eyes had dimmed considerably. I know they certainly won't train Anakin after they see my memories, no matter how much we argue with them. Qui-Gon sighed a bit, turning his gaze back to the destination.
I hate to say it, but you might be right. I understand now why you didn't want to say anything until the council had decided,
he said as Obi-Wan palmed the door open.
But the council still has the right to revoke training from anyone, even with the master's say. They might have panicked and sent him off to the Anger Corps anyway.
True, Obi-Wan said and fell silent, thinking. After a moment, Qui-Gon spoke up, interrupting the quiet.
I have a feeling you're going to have to give me a lesson in sparring now, Padawan. Your skill was incredible. How did you manage it and not want to collapse now?
The Force is supporting me until I can safely relax, Obi-Wan replied, his grin returning briefly. I still barely believe that I managed to beat a Sith Master. I don't think I would have either if Anakin hadn't knocked him practically senseless with that wave. Obi-Wan threw him a dry smile. It seems he's destined to defeat Sith no matter how old he is, though that's certainly better than him joining them. Qui-Gon lifted an eyebrow a little, sensing the small shudders that trembled down his apprentice's spine.
Palpatine didn't seem too powerful, though,
he said, trying to think of a different subject but failing.
You seemed to have more trouble fighting your Anakin.
Obi-Wan made no response as they stepped through the door and made their way down a rather dark and narrow hall. It ended with a row of doors, which Obi-Wan began opening before he answered. It was because I didn't want to fight Anakin, Obi-Wan said at last, as he and Qui-Gon peered into some kind of storage room, the walls lined with narrow shelves. I have a feeling that if Palpatine had been anything like the Palpatine I remember, I would have been able to hold my own. That Sith had 13 years to grow even stronger in the dark side. I'm not sure how the battle with Master Yoda turned out, but I don't think anyone could have beaten him.
You're joking,
Qui-Gon whispered as he stared at Obi-Wan, who merely moved forward into the room, his gaze flicking from shelf to shelf. Rather nice of them to be so organized, Obi-Wan mused as he picked up a rather nasty-looking tool from one of the shelves. It was a tiny spiked ball that rested on the tip of a long, thin cylinder, and Qui-Gon could see small flecks of dried blood in between the spikes. Lovely, isn't it? Obi-Wan drawled, his lips curling in disgust, and he tossed the instrument back onto the shelf. Sith torture devices. That one is used on the backs of the knees or the ankles to sever the tendons there. Qui-Gon found himself staring. Again!
You know this. How?
He asked, swallowing around the creeping horror within him. The force shivered in the room, the cold from the dark permeating it. The Separatists used many of these during the war, Obi-Wan replied, his tone a bit too nonchalant for Qui-Gon's liking, who found that his throat was burning with the acrid taste of bile. I saw many of them used by the various apprentices who appeared. That he had been the one to experience some of them firsthand went unsaid, and Qui-Gon had to shut his eyes for a moment, drawing a deep breath to calm himself. He knew it was going to take a while before he could get used to this new, darker persona of his Padawan. Though in many ways the same, there was a deep current of cynicism in place of the unflagging optimism Qui-Gon had known and at times relished. He was more jaded, more weary than a man twice his age. The spark Qui-Gon had seen as he defeated Palpatine, vanishing in the shadows of the room, his eyes a frosty cerulean as they continued to scan the shelves.
Tell me what I need to look for, Padawan.
Qui-Gon said, stepping further into the room, and frowned when he saw that Obi-Wan had frozen, his gaze locked on something Qui-Gon couldn't see. His eyes blanked, his entire body tensed, and his knuckles whitened as his fingers dug deeply into his palms.
Obi-Wan?
He whispered, reaching out through their bond to find himself surrounded by a swirl of darkness, his flesh crawling as tiny insects wormed their way through his muscles, his connection with the Force swirling into nothing, his mind! Qui-Gon jerked away, watching Obi-Wan shut his eyes.
Forgive me, Master, he whispered. I should have shielded better.
Was that a memory?
Qui-Gon asked, his voice hushed, and Obi-Wan nodded once, his eyes reopening a little.
Triggered by...
he continued, turning his head to follow Obi-Wan's gaze, and frowned a little. On the shelf before them stood a simple mask, displayed rather prominently, as though it were a thing of great value. It was relatively unremarkable, however, wrapped around a mannequin head, but the sight of it gave him chills. It was made entirely from black cloth, as if someone had taken a sheet and wrapped it around someone's head, cutting out only 2 tiny holes for the eyes. He saw several red markings stitched into the fabric on the forehead, arranged in an unfamiliar design. He started to reach towards it, intending to examine it more fully, but the pure darkness that radiated off of it made him jerk back as though burned.
What is it?
Qui-Gon asked, his tone still quiet as he glanced at Obi-Wan, who spun around and shivered.
A Sith torture mask,
Obi-Wan replied.
I was forced to wear one once. It wasn't the best experience.
Qui-Gon threw one final glance at the mask before wrapping an arm around Obi-Wan's shoulders and guiding him away. A mixture of shock and revulsion rose steadily in Qui-Gon, who couldn't believe the kinds of things his Padawan had undergone, or understand the havoc it wrought upon him.
So help me, Obi-Wan, I'll do everything I can to make sure you won't have to live that kind of life again,
he thought, his jaw clenching in determination.
Help me find those binders and inhibitors you spoke of.
Qui-Gon said, his voice steady despite the growing desire to smash everything in this room to tiny bits.
Did you notice any form of organization?
Obi-Wan nodded a little, his body unthawing under Qui-Gon's arm. They're grouped by function. Restraining devices should be in that corner, and the inhibitors are most likely in the small cooling unit behind us. Everything was exactly where Obi-Wan said, and after packing up the supply of binders and loading all the tiny full syringes into a carrying case specifically designed for their transport, Qui-Gon bustled his apprentice out of there, lest more horrifying memories surface. They returned to find things much as they had left it, and once a pair of binders were snapped on the Sith apprentice, Qui-Gon watched as Obi-Wan knelt beside the unconscious Zephyr and flicked open the case, drawing one of the syringes. He felt all the masters around them start in surprise as Obi-Wan pushed up the Sith's sleeve and administered the inhibitors with the aplomb of a skilled doctor. Padawan Kenobi, Master Amidala began, a heavy frown marring her features, but she didn't continue when Obi-Wan removed another syringe and started for Palpatine. The senator jerked a little and glowered when Mace and Qui-Gon tightened their guard.
There is a hidden darkness in you, Kenobi,
Palpatine said, regardless of the lightsabers in his throat.
You hurt in a way your fellow Jedi did not.
That is true, he replied, and repeated the process of injecting the inhibitors. He drew back his Palpatine hissed and shivered as they instantly took effect. Because I have seen and experienced things most Jedi have not. He said nothing more, leaving Palpatine to mull over his words, and Qui-Gon sensed that those who remained unaware of the truth did so as well.
Come,
Yoda said, levitating himself up to the door.
let's to discuss we have.